Right, so if you thought Keir Starmer was bad before, that his position regarding Israel and Gaza was already unforgivable, then he's just stood up in Parliament and said something so cold, callous and cruel, so evil in fact, I would go that far, it'll make your blood run cold. His slavish loyalty to Israel, his bought and paid for backside by the Israel lobby, who he owes everything to, means even now, 13 months in what is clearly a genocide in Gaza, that a plausible case for that has been demonstrated according to the International Court of Justice, and Keir Starmer continues to not only deny that, but to stand up and arrogantly talk down to someone putting that fact to him and more, but to still have the brass neck to point to the night of October 7th as well, as if that is when all of this actually began, and that trumps absolutely everything Israel have done since and will continue to do going forwards. What Keir Starmer has essentially stood up and declared to the world is that he will never define what is happening in Gaza as a genocide, therefore. And given his background as a human rights lawyer, he cannot even claim ignorance on such matters. He knows a genocide when he sees it, but unless it's politically advantageous to himself, he'll be selective in when he chooses to admit that, which is positively sociopathic.
Mr. Speaker, Article 2 of the United Nations Genocide Convention makes it explicitly clear that genocide is not about numbers, it's about intent. And the intent of the Israeli government and the IDF has been explicitly clear in words and in actions over the past 400 days. More than 45,000 innocent men, women and children killed. On the 28th of October, the Foreign Secretary denied that a genocide was even taking place and suggested that the Israeli army had not yet killed enough Palestinians to constitute a genocide. And last week, the PMQs, the Prime Minister started that he has never referred to the atrocities happening in Gaza as a genocide. Will the Prime Minister share his definition of genocide with this House, and will he state what further action he is prepared to take to save lives of desperate and starving men, women and children, given that we now hold the presidency of the United Nations Security Council?
It would be wise to start a question like that by reference to what happened in October of last year. I'm well aware of the definition of genocide, and that is why I've never described this and referred to it as genocide.
Right, so that was Independent Alliance MP Ayub Khan, himself a barrister, stood up at PMQs just yesterday talking about Article 2 of the Genocide Convention, which defines the 5 articles that describe a genocide in international law. He brought up the fact it is not about numbers, but intent, in direct contradiction to David Lammy's idiotic comments from the other week, where he implied it could not be a genocide in Gaza because not enough people, in his view, had died yet. Lammy is also a lawyer, apparently, but much like he is a politician, he comes across not on top of his brief, little more than a mass of imbecilic enthusiasms. Khan then turned to Starmer himself, though, where last week at PMQs he was put on the spot by, I think it was Zara Sultana, when he said he has never described what has happened in Gaza as a genocide. And so Khan put him on the spot and asked him straight, what is your definition of genocide then? And when Starmer stood to respond, he didn't give a definition at all. He just brought up the night of October 7th, and that reference to that should be made first and foremost, and that he knew what the definition of genocide was, and that was exactly why he has not described Gaza as a genocide. Words failed me yesterday when I saw that. I went ballistic. And it's probably a good thing I didn't choose to record this yesterday. Let me tell you, I was bloody raging. The sheer arrogance of talking down to another lawyer, bringing up international law, and then just skirting over it like it doesn't matter, by saying what it is, and I have no doubt of that, Starmer was a human rights lawyer. But clearly he was in it for the paycheck, not any belief in those human rights themselves, because it seems to me that by his own admission, the people of Gaza don't have any. That'll be news to an awful lot of lawyers around the world, because Keir Starmer seems to think that the Genocide Convention doesn't apply to Israel when they're breaking it, doesn't cover the people of Gaza, that the attack on Israel on the night of October 7th was the beginning of everything, and that everything Israel do and have done since, no matter how many people die at their hands as a result, 45,000 in Gaza now, as Ayub Khan clearly stated, it is all in the name of Israel being able to defend herself, as Starmer ridiculously puts it each and every time he's asked. 70% of those who have been killed in Gaza have been women and children, and yet those deaths, it would seem, are legitimate and acceptable to Starmer in the name of Israel's self-defence, which, given his refusal to declare their actions as genocidal, must surely be the case, therefore. Does it not? collective punishment by not caring whether it is a combatant or civilian who dies. Tents that get bombed from refugee camps to hospital grounds. He could attack Russia for striking hospitals in Ukraine. He can call their actions genocidal, but when Israel do the exact same thing, so that's self-defense. The law on what constitutes a genocide under the Genocide Convention that we are signed up to as a nation are clear and not debatable. And if any one of these definitions are met, then it is a genocide. A. Killing members of the group. B. Causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. C. Deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. D. Imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. E. Forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. According to one of Israel's own newspapers, as I covered in a video the other day, Haaretz, in just the last week, Israel have met 4 of these criteria. So this is a genocide 4 times over, therefore. But Starmer doesn't agree. And given his insistence on pointing to the night of October 7th, where Israel itself has been identified as using helicopters and tanks against their own people, both at the Nova Music Festival and the nearby kibbutzim, where they also enacted Hannibal directives on that night to shoot their own people rather than let them be taken hostage, even pointing to that night as he does not exonerate Israel at all, but it just amplifies their barbarism even more. Taking hostages is a crime. Of course it is. And that is on Hamas. But to say Israel can essentially wipe out people on the scale they are doing, enact ethnic cleansing in the north of the Gaza Strip, where they are now seizing land, to deny humanitarian aid and cause famine, to see the return of polio, such as the dire state of health conditions, can ban the only aid agency that has kept Gaza habitable for decades in UNRWA, a UN-backed agency, a UK-backed agency, therefore, and so much more, and so much worse, as Starmer's comments imply. It's quite simply sociopathic. But what am I saying? Of course we know Starmer backs this, don't we?
I'm very clear. Israel does have that right to defend herself, and Hamas bears responsibility.
A siege is appropriate? Cutting off power, cutting off water? Sakir?
Well, I think that Israel does have that right. It is an ongoing situation. Obviously, everything should be done within international law, but I don't want to step away from the sort of core principles that Israel has a right to defend herself and Hamas bears responsibility for these terrorist acts. And I would call on all responsible states, particularly Middle East responsible states, to call this out for what it is, and to stand with the world in utterly condemning these actions by Hamas.
It's little wonder he has never apologised for saying Israel could commit those war crimes as stated in that clip, because it seems he still agrees with that stance. It seems they can do what they like, and he will never call it a genocide, because all of it, everything Israel has done, the very worst things you've heard them commit over the last 400 plus days now, by Starmer's answer to Ayub Khan, is justified and not a genocide because it's all self-defence. I actually genuinely think it is worth asking if the country is being run by a literal sociopath at this point. According to the Mayo Clinic website, antisocial personality disorder, ASPD, is the proper term for sociopathy, is defined as follows. Antisocial personality disorder, sometimes called sociopathy, is a mental health condition in which a person consistently shows no regard for right and wrong and ignores the rights and feelings of others. People with antisocial personality disorder tend to purposely make others angry or upset and manipulate or treat others harshly or with cruel indifference. They lack remorse or do not regret their behaviour. People with antisocial personality disorder often violate the law, becoming criminals. Refusing to acknowledge international law where it comes to genocide in Gaza. Well, that seems to be the case, doesn't it? Showing no regard for the people of Gaza in his response to PMQs and has therefore completely disregarded their human rights under international law. Cruel indifference, I think that sums that up. Lack of remorse appears to be the case. Making others purposely angry. Well, certainly several politicians were there, let alone the rest of the country. And we can point to various policy decisions made by Labour as well, as far as that goes. How angry Starmer and the Labour Party he leads has made the British public. How unpopular he has become and how fast that has happened. And they may also lie, apparently, as well, these sociopathic people. And, well, enough said on that where Keir Starmer is concerned, eh? It also means he can have as much atrocity pointed out to him, all the images and videos we've seen, going back over a year shown to him, and he wouldn't bat an eyelid at it. Of course, another explanation might just be that having stuck to this line of support for Israel for as long as he has, unquestioningly, slavishly loyal, bought and paid for by pro-Israel Zionist donors, he's simply in too deep now to back off. If he changed his tune now, he'd have to admit to being complicit in war crimes. He'd have to admit to having made a mistake. He'd have to admit to being wrong. Keir Starmer might be forced into an apology, and let's face it, he never, ever does that. Keir Starmer never says sorry for anything. He's given cover to Israel, given weapons and military aid to Israel, continues to do so, has provided intelligence to Israel from all its various flights from the RAF base on Cyprus over Gaza, and not least allowed that same base to be used to deliver said military aid and munitions to Israel itself, it is emphatically alleged. Keir Starmer belongs in The Hague. This latest comment, this response to a question at PMQ's, should be the biggest mistake he's ever made politically, because he's effectively said there's no limit to what Israel can do in Gaza, because all of it is a legitimate response to the events of that one night on the 7th of October last year, which in his mind is all on Hamas, in spite of plenty of evidence now that what transpired on that night was not necessarily all on them. He will never, therefore, ever admit to Gaza being a genocide. He can't. He's boxed himself in such a way he could never admit to that now without admitting his own complicity in a war crime, his own guilt. He has damned himself to a point he can never recover from with this, and his reign as Prime Minister cannot end soon enough. He doesn't represent us at all with a mindset like this. Of course, one fool who will follow in Starmer's footsteps and frankly has been shown to say whatever necessary to benefit himself the most, no matter who the Labour leader has been, is indeed David Lammy, the other monster Ayub Khan brought up in his question. For more on what he actually said of Israel's genocide, that 45,000 dead Gazans apparently isn't enough to constitute a genocide, well, I tore apart that claim by looking at some other claims of Lammy's on such matters as genocide previously, and what a surprise, he's a hypocrite too. Get all the details of that story in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.